So, what I thought I would do today is discuss in a formal manner um, the question of Islam. Is Islam a religion of peace? And if you look at the title of my X Spaces, I basically say, let's build the nomological network. Now, some of you may know what that is, others don't. So, please forgive me if you already know what that is, but I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining what that is. So, as I explain in chapter 7 of The Parasitic Mind, a nomological network of cumulative evidence is a very powerful epistemological tool that tries to amass as much evidence from as many distinct lines of evidence in support of the veracity of your position. So, as I've explained in the past, and here you can go to a paper that I wrote in 2017 titled On the Method of Evolutionary Psychology and Its Applicability to Consumer Research. It's published in one of the most prestigious journals in the field, Journal of Marketing Research. And in it, I show three different examples of how to build a nomological network. Uh, One is to demonstrate the biological bases of sex specific toy preferences, meaning that the fact that little boys and little girls prefer certain toys is not due to social construction, but is actually due to universal biological based causes. Then the second nomological network that I present in that paper is the men's evolved preference for the female hourglass figure. And then the third example that I discuss in that paper is the biological and evolutionary roots of loss aversion. Why is it that losses loom larger than uh, gains? It's relevant to something called prospect theory, which Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for with his work with Amos Tversky. So, a nomological network of cumulative evidence basically says if I have to try to convince the absolutely most uh, hostile audience members of the veracity of my position, how would I go about doing that? And so, again, some of you have heard me mention this before, but let me mention it again. I'll take the example of toy preferences. Well, I can get you data from developmental psychology showing you that infants who are too young to be yet socialized already exhibit those sex specific toy preferences. So that already puts a death nail into the social constructivist view of toy preferences. I can show you data from many other species, vervet monkeys, rhesus monkeys, and chimpanzees, showing you that they exhibit the exact same toy preferences as human infants. I can get you data from many different cultures that are very different from Western cultures, say sub Saharan Africa, and showing you that they exhibit the same preferences. I can get you data from 2,500 years ago, whereby an analysis of how children are depicted on funerary monuments, say mausoleums, they're shown depicted in exactly the same way. I can get you data from pediatric endocrinology showing you that little girls who suffer from congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is a disorder that masculinizes the behavior and morphology of little girls, such girls who suffer from this disorder exhibit preferences that are akin to those of little boys. And so, bit by bit, I can completely drown you in a preponderance of evidence that hopefully makes it clear that my position is veridical. It's a very, very powerful technique. And so, what I'd like to do today is apply this exact methodology to is Islam a religion of peace? So we can, there is data. And by the way, in chapter 6 and 7 of the Parasitic Mind, I exactly go into that. Chapter 6 looks at ostrich parasitic syndrome, which are, the types of cognitive biases that people use to ignore the reality about Islam. And then chapter 7, I actually provide the the nomological network of cumulative evidence regarding whether Islam is peaceful or not. But here, I posted earlier this afternoon the actual nomological network. So if you just scroll down in my feed, you will see the nomological network. So here what you have is in the middle of the figure, you have this the sentence that I'm trying to prove to either be true or not. Is Islam a peaceful, merciful, and tolerant religion? And then I've got one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. There are 10 boxes labeled A through J that provide distinct lines of evidence that either prove that Islam is peaceful or not. So let's go through these. And I will also mention a few other things in a few minutes. So before I'm trying to decide how to do this. Okay, let's go with the nomological network. Okay. So what is the type of data that I would have to demonstrate to you that definitively answers the question, is any religion peaceful or not? So, for example, let's say we were trying to build a nomological network for Jainism. Well, we know that Jains are so pacifist, they are so peaceful, that truly adherent Jains, this is Jain, right? Jainism is the religion of Jains. Uh, they will walk on the sidewalk with a broom whereby they sweep the floor as they walk because they're so afraid that they might inadvertently step on an ant and kill it. And therefore, the content of that religion certainly suggests that Jains are extraordinarily peaceful to the point of not wanting to even kill an ant inadvertently. Okay, so let's go through this nomological network for Islam. Hopefully, it can shed light on whether it is a peaceful religion or not. Okay, so we can look at contemporary FBI data. So this is box A. And contemporary FBI data, we can look at, for example, an analysis of FBI terrorist lists to gauge whether a particular religion has a greater likelihood of contributing to that list. Okay, and I offer that list for Islam versus other religions, and as you might expect, it is the most wanted international terrorists are almost exclusively Muslim, and they come from many different countries. So it's not as though they're all from Yemen or all from the Palestinian territories. They come from many, many different cultures where different languages are spoken, but what they share in common is that they are all Muslim. Does that offer some insight? Well, it certainly seems to suggest something. I can get you similar analysis for governmental no-fly lists. So, for example, do most people who are on the no-fly lists come from Laos? Are they Vietnamese? Are they Bolivian? Are they Nigerian? Is there anything, is there a great preponderance of a particular type of individual who is on the no-fly list? So these two data sets would already tell us quite a bit about whether Seventh-day Adventists or Jains or Buddhists or Shinto adherents or Jews, who is most likely? Well, so this first box, A, certainly suggests that, we might be converging to something, but we're not going to stop here. Let's go to box B. We could look at historical data. We could look at an analysis of the number of people that have been killed by adherents of Islam in its name since its founding. Example, wars of conquest to spread the faith. Now, there are different estimates. One conservative estimate places that number at 300 million killed by Islamic military conquests and supremacy. So when you're talking, for example, about colonialism and about Jews being colonialists in the land of Israel, a land for which they are truly indigenous to that land by definition, as defined by the most obvious historical records, called Old Testament. Okay, so if Israel is supposedly a colonialist state, there are 56 countries that today are part of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, that once upon a time had 0% Islam. And now most of those countries are almost exclusively Muslim. Not now it is true that not in every one of those countries was it simply done via the sword, but in many cases it very much was done strictly by the sword. In some cases it takes 5 minutes to conquer a country by Islam. In other cases, it's a slow process. It takes a while. It's by forced conversion, it's by Sharia law, it's by imposing a dhimmi status on all of the non Muslims. Dhimmi is the term for a third class citizen who lives under Islamic rule. It's not a pretty life. So the historical data is astoundingly clear. So, for example, just in the conquests of Hindus, the Muslim conquerors, one estimate places it at 80 million killed. Now, these are not things that you have to believe. You just crack a book open, look at the history. Over the past 1400 years, has Islam conquered endless number of countries through violence and supremacy. There is no ideology that has been more colonial and imperialistic and supremacist than Islam. That's a fact. Now, many people are very proud of that. Hitler loved Islam because it was a masculine religion. It took no shit. It imposed itself. It was virile. And so, from that perspective, yes, Islam is a very macho, masculine religion, right? So, as I said, we could look at the historical data and it places the number of certainly converted, subjugated, harassed, raped, murdered at many, many hundreds of millions. So that's number two. The, the canonical, iconic symbol of Islam is the sword. Why do you think it's the sword? Is it because, as I satirically said, it is the sword because it's a culinary weapon to spread local cuisines to other lands? Or does the sword suggest that there might be a violent military element to Islam? You just have to listen to Islamic scholars, what they say about Islam. Islam is meant to rule the world. There will be peace on earth when Islam has conquered every inch of the world. The world is divided into two. It's a binary logic. There is Dar al Islam and Dar al Harb. Dar al Islam is the house of Islam. Dar al Harb, Harb means war in Arabic, is the house of war. Any land that is not yet ruled by Islam is under the official canonical status of being under the house of war. Now, that doesn't mean that we attack the infidels at every turn, but when the time is right, that is what we must do canonically. And by the way, once a land has ever been conquered by Islam, it is forevermore under the dominion of Islam. That's why Andalusia in Spain, the Muslims will say, Inshallah, we will reconquer what is ours, which is Andalusia, even though it is in Christian Spain. It was once ruled by Islam several hundred years ago, and it must be rightfully returned to Islam. That's why Palestine must be Islamic. It doesn't matter that the Jews have ancestral claims to that land. Once they are no longer the dominant force there and Islam rules, say under the Ottoman Empire, it is Islamic forevermore. So right now I've showed you data from two boxes in the nomological network, FBI data, and I've given you several sources. I've also given you historical data over the past 1400 years. Let's go on to box C. We could do a content analysis of the canonical texts. Now, what is a content analysis? Content analysis is a way to quantify, using the scientific method, the extent to which Islam preaches love and brotherhood versus genocidal hate and supremacy. So when for example, you say, let's suppose I want to study whether, you know, how do romance novels depict the male hero? in a romance novel, because I want to understand what is it that women fantasize about when it comes to male heroes. Yes, because we know that almost all romance novels are exclusively consumed by women. So if I want to get a window into women's fantasies, then I can study that product, which is specifically targeted to that which they fantasize about in romance novels. Now, how would I go about doing that? So I could do a content analysis where I code the types of descriptors that are used to describe the male protagonist. So I can use an official, quantifiable, objective, unbiased methodology that lends itself to then testing hypotheses. So, does the Quran, does the Sirah, the biography of Muhammad, do the hadiths, the sayings and deeds of Muhammad, do they preach love and kindness, or do they preach conquest, intolerance, hatred, domination? We can answer that question. Well, there are many people who've answered that question, but I'll turn you to Dr. Bill Warner, who is a physicist by training. He's got a center that he founded many years ago called the Center for the Study of Political Islam. You should all go check it out. Dr. Warner was an early guest on my show, The Saad Truth. He's done that work for you. He applied the rigorous scientific method to study what does what does the trilogy of Islam, the Quran, the Hadiths, and the Sirah of Muhammad, are they filled with love and kindness, or are they filled with astounding genocidal hate? Well, Dr. Warner quantified as there is more Jew hatred in the Quran, in those texts, than there is in Hitler's Mein Kampf. Well, I didn't need that analysis to tell you that, because I grew up in that world. I come from those cultures. I could tell you what is quoted about the Jews from those books because I heard them quoted to me. So we could study the content of these texts to tell us whether the religion preaches love and kindness. Now, some of you might say, but wait a minute, I took in my Islamic intersectional feminism class at Oberlin College, I was told of the quote, there is no compulsion in religion. You have your religion, I have mine. And that's straight out of the Quran. Isn't it peaceful, Dr. Saad? Well, this is where you have what's called abrogation. Remember these words. Use this knowledge when you're speaking to people. Abrogation is the theological mechanism that allows the Quran to have contradictory statements. So if in one passage it says no compulsion in religion, and in a later passage it says smite the infidels, everyone should be Muslim, kill, kill, kill everything in sight, well, then how could God both say the kind thing and the less kind thing? Well, that's where you have abrogation. Whenever there are two statements that are contradictory, the later verse supersedes the early verse. It abrogates it. And if you want to temporarily mark it, it coincides with what's called the Meccan versus the Medinan period of Muhammad's proselytizing. Namely, during the Meccan period, which was for many years in his early career as a supposed prophet, he was only able to attract about 150 adherents through many, many years of proselytizing because he preached a peaceful and kind message. When later he, through hijrah, migration, he moved to Medina, then he altered his message to one that was a lot more violent, and suddenly the number of adherents greatly grew. So, as he received these new revelations, they were increasingly intolerant and violent and supremacist and so on. And again, you don't have to believe me, you just have to go through the text and see for yourself. All right, so far we've looked at contemporary FBI data, and I've discussed several databases. We've looked at historical record over the past 1400 years of conquest. We've looked at content analysis of canonical text. Let's keep going. Now I'm going to box D in the nomological network. That's data on converts. So we could do an analysis of all terror attacks involving individuals who are converts to their new religion, and does conversion to one religion dominate the landscape? Depending on how you define religions, there are well over 10,000 religions. Now, this includes, for example, many denominations of Christianity. So you could talk about Seventh day Adventists and Lutheran and Episcopalian and Protestants and Catholics and Southern Baptists. Each of those would be, even though they're all Christian, would be counted as a different religion or denomination. And there are well over 10,000 religions. And so we could look at every single case where the person who committed the terror attack was a convert from another religion, and then see whether converts of any particular religion are most likely to commit terror acts. And I think you know what the answer to that one is. It is astoundingly pointing to a singular religion, right? It's not Seventh day Adventists, it's not Orthodox Judaism, it's not Buddhists, it's not Hindus. You know what it is. So now you already have tons of data that suggests whether Islam is peaceful or not. And I'm talking about Islam. That doesn't say anything about the fact that we all know endless number of Muslims who decide not to follow the teachings of Islam and just live peaceful lives. There are nice Muslims and mean Muslims. There are nice Jews and mean Jews. There are nice atheists and mean atheists. We're talking about Islam as a codified set of ideas. Does it promote peace or not? It's a very easy question to answer. Let's keep going. Database box E in my nomological network. This is looking at databases of terror attacks. So, for example, the University of Maryland has a global terrorism database. This is a university database. There is a Religion of Peace website that has kept track of every single terror attacks committed since 9/11, and they provide you a link to the actual news story that reported that, right? So it's all extremely well documented. And then you could certainly go to Wikipedia. There's a French database. There are many, many different databases that track the totality of terror attacks committed by all religions. If you added up the 9,999 religions combined other than Islam, it wouldn't add up to 0.01% of the number of terror attacks committed by Islamic terrorists since 9/11 alone in nearly 70 countries. That number is rapidly approaching 50,000 terror attacks. So imagine if I told you that 9,999 religions almost have zero terror attacks, and one has close to 50,000 using different databases. Would that suggest that we've got some sort of data that suggests that maybe there might be some violence linked to Islam? Or are all of those Islamic terrorists completely misrepresenting, mistranslating, and misinterpreting their noble, peaceful religion? Or is it that all those guys who call themselves Muhammad, Mahmud, and Ahmad are really Zionist false flag operation guys? Their real names are Mordechai, Moshe, and Solomon. You judge for yourself. Let's go on to box F, governmental lists of terror groups. So, for example, Public Safety Canada has a list of terrorist organizations. The US Department of State's Foreign Terror List Organization list also lists all the terror groups. And by the way, in Chapter 7 of The Parasitic Mind, I list every single group that is on the US State Department's terrorist list, and they're almost all Islamic. And they're not Islamic only from the Middle East. Some are from Southeast Asia, some are African, some are in the Middle East, some are, they're everywhere. So again, it's not to a specific region, it's not a specific culture, it's not a specific ethnicity or race. What unifies all of them is that they're united under the very peaceful flag of Islam. Let's keep going. Let's go to box G. We can look at global surveys. Global surveys, in many cases, by super woke and progressive organizations. So, for example, Pew, right, the survey company Pew surveys track people's attitudes and behaviors towards foundational values of secular and liberal societies. So you could look at what are the views about freedom of speech, about blasphemy, about homosexuality, about women's freedoms, about attitudes towards Jews. Well, if you look at attitudes towards Jews in Islamic countries, in many cases, 95 to 99% of the surveyed people hold deeply unfavorable attitude towards the Jews, even though they've never met a single Jew in their life, because the Jews have long been exterminated and eradicated from those societies. And yet, you have 95 to 99% of the polled people in those surveys exhibit genocidal hate of the Jew. We could look at global patterns of Jew hatred, for example, the ADL report, the Anti-Defamation League. And if you look at, the top countries in the world that have the strongest Jew hatred, every single one is Islamic. Let's keep going. Now we're going to get to box H. We could look at infectious memeplexes and the plight of religious minorities. What does that mean? So, for example, we could do a longitudinal analysis of how well religious minorities fare in countries where Islam is the majority religion. So, for example, Syria used to have tons of Christians. What happened to them? Egypt used to be a largely Coptic Christian country. What happened to them? Iraq used to have a huge Christian society. What happened to them? Of course, Iran used to have all sorts of non Islamic indigenous people. What happened to them? Lebanon used to be a Christian majority country. What happened to Lebanon? And it goes on and on and on. What happens to non Muslims in Islamic countries is always the same. They seem to magically and mysteriously disappear, so that one day you wake up and that society is 99 to 100% Islamic. How did that happen? You could study a mimetic analysis to examine the spread of a religion. This is something that I've been writing about independently for quite a while, but I recently shared one. This is from Citizen Warrior, and I put the link in one of my recent tweets on X that looks at the terrifying brilliance of the Islamic memeplex, which what basically he's doing is exactly in line with what I've talked about for years about how you could apply a mimetic analysis to study the spread of many things. And in this case, take for example Judaism versus Islam. Judaism, by definition, is a non-proselytizing religion, meaning it doesn't try to convert others. As a matter of fact, it is viewed with great derision. It is canonically forbidden to try to proselytize to others. If someone wants to convert to Judaism, you're supposed to dissuade them from doing so, because you're testing their spiritual resolve to actually want to become Jewish. It takes many years before you can convert to Judaism. You're not supposed to convert for ulterior motives. Let's say your prospective spouse is Jewish. You're not supposed to convert to Judaism because your wife is Jewish or so on. That would invalidate the conversion. In Islam, you just have to say the Shahada, one sentence, and voila, you're now Muslim. And then you've got the you can't leave Islam once you become Muslim. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the top leading Sunni cleric from Al-Azhar University, no one could say he doesn't know Islam. He was the highest Islamic cleric until very recently. He passed away. He said, were it not for the the penalty against this desertion from Islam, then Islam would not have survived. So then it doesn't take much of a mimeticist to understand why Islam is profoundly successful. Successful in the sense that 1.7 billion people are Muslim. Nearly a quarter of all the world's population is Muslim. So, from a marketing perspective, from a mimetic perspective, Islam is very, very successful. Judaism is not. Judaism sucks at marketing. Islam is brilliant. And so, I would urge you to certainly read my work, and you can read here Citizen Warriors, the terrifying brilliance of the Islamic memeplex. He goes through, I think, 25 different items that point to why it is that Islam is so viral. And, I've independently discussed many of these as well, and I certainly discussed some of these ideas in The Parasitic Mind. All right, let's go to box I, data from global indices. So, how do Islamic majority countries score on a broad range of well being, freedom, and equality metrics? There are all sorts of global organizations that track using very sophisticated metrics the quality of life, the quality of values, the liberties, the freedoms, economic freedom, sexual freedom, journalistic freedom, freedom of women, freedom of gays, uh, every imaginable value that we would consider as laudable in the West, we can rank countries on that. And then we could see, does does the West provide higher scores on such metrics, or do Islamic societies? Well, it may not surprise you to know that on almost all of the metrics, Islamic societies score the worst. So if Islam is such a beautiful, freedom promoting feminist religion, then you would like to see all of those countries that are Islamic scoring the best on those metrics, and yet they seem to score the worst. We could look at ISIS membership. So, for example, ISIS, which is the Islamic State that you know was defeated by Trump during his first term, but there are still remnants of it all over the world. It had individuals from 80 plus countries that joined it. What is it that they had in common? Because a lot of people say, oh, no, 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 ISIS is not Islamic. The Islamic State is not Islamic. The Islamic State, which was a caliphate, which was run by a guy that had a PhD in Islamic theology, is not Islamic, and yet the individuals who came to ISIS from 80 plus countries, some of them were very light skinned with blonde hair, some of them were Asian, some of them were black, some of them were white, some of them were multiracial. They had one thing in common: they were all Muslim. So, is there enough data here to suggest that maybe Islam might not be the great religion of peace that all of our presidents and prime ministers tell us? Well, I think the data is pretty clear. There's almost no data that one could ever make up that could answer this question in a clearer and more unequivocal manner, and yet people are very, very tepid to ever say these things because people are taught that it is simply impolite to ever discuss people's political choices or political's religions. This is not something that you do. But it's precisely this parasitic mind and then suicidal empathy, my next book, that leads us to this problem. Because We may love individual Muslims, and I know more Muslims than probably all the people that are listening to this X Spaces combined. And I've never had any problem with any of them, and they're all lovely. But that's a silly, infantile argument. We're talking about whether when an ideology comes in and starts taking over a society, whether that society will result in the flourishing of Western values or not. If it does result in increased liberties and freedom, then we should increase the Islamization of the West. If it doesn't, then maybe we need to reconsider our deep Islamophilia. Maybe we need to reconsider the fact that all immigrants are equally likely to assimilate. There you have it, folks. I hate to say this, it demeans me to say this. I harbor zero hate towards any individuals. I judge people by their individual merits. I am more friendly and affectionate towards Imam Tawhidi, who is an Imam, as you know. Some of you know him as the Imam of Peace, because I actually share many values with him, despite the fact that I'm Jewish and he's Muslim. So this has nothing to do with loving or not loving individual people. It has to do with an honest, sober, reasoned analysis of the content of particular ideologies and whether those ideologies are consistent with our Western values or not. The quicker we're able to understand these types of analyses, the quicker we can hopefully ensure that your children and mine and their children will live in free societies. Thanks everyone for joining us, for joining me. I hope that you found this helpful. Spread the news so that other people can hopefully listen to this message. I'm taping this X Spaces. I will be posting it as a separate file again on X, on my podcast, and on YouTube. Please spread the word and subscribe to my podcast, subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's free. Maybe you could subscribe to my exclusive content. It's only, I think, $5 or $6 a month. Have a great day, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.